Hello, everyone. My name is Ujjwal. I'm a principal machine learning solutions architect here at AWS, focusing on healthcare and life sciences. And today I'm here to talk about machine learning in healthcare, and specifically our tool, Amazon SageMaker, that allows you to build machine learning models at scale. Before we get started, I wanted to level set with the audience today on some of the trends that we are seeing in the healthcare and life sciences industry and some associated challenges. The first thing I want to bring up is the challenge of healthcare data. These data sets are coming from a variety of source systems, which include like patient records, their imaging data. There are various data formats and standards that healthcare organizations need to adhere to, and these standards themselves can present themselves in different formats. And that's the reason why healthcare data is really complex to parse out any meaningful insights from. The second thing that we really focus upon when it comes to healthcare is the privacy and security of that data. Healthcare data contains a lot of protected health information, and that requires organizations to make sure that their environments are robust to cyber attacks and leaks. The next area that we'll have a theme around in terms of healthcare and life sciences and machine learning specifically is the area of research and discovery. Now, this is an area that works on the basis of a lot of trial and errors. This area allows for new drug discovery to occur, or a variety of compounds to be discovered that can be then taken into clinical development. And these research and discovery type of use cases require brute force compute, a lot of like which actually works on a set of sequential steps. So there's a lot of room for optimization when it comes to research and discovery. And then finally, clinical development is the process of actually taking a drug to the market, like right from organizing clinical trials around it, different phases of clinical trials, tracking different adverse events that happen through that trial, and then finally phase 4 clinical trial where the drug is actually administered in patients and the record is kept. Now, all of these areas are areas where our customers are actually building machine learning models on, and we'll get into some of those details in the rest of these presentation. Now, coming back to the theme of how machine learning can actually help solve these challenges, the first thing to note is machine learning can be applied directly to healthcare data sets in different formats. For example, you can use machine learning to detect anomalies in different medical images, or you can use machine learning to actually identify trends in your patient history records, all of which are in very varied formats and different set of standards. The other thing where machine learning can truly optimize healthcare and life sciences is the area of document processing. Now, if you are in the healthcare industry, you would understand that a lot of the steps that are involved in the healthcare transactions involve different types of documents. For example, you present, let's say you go into an appointment and you register yourself at the front desk. There's a patient intake form where you have to fill out, or you're going and let's say capturing all the different notes that the patients and doctor kind of create through consultations, and these consultations are actually captured in a very unstructured manner in different documents. And machine learning can help by deriving intelligence from these documents. It can help by extracting entities from these documents for different search and query features. And this allows for this entire document repository to be machine learning enabled so that both patients and physicians and different healthcare practitioners can start like looking at relevant data from a large corpus. The next area that we have a lot of focus on is around claims, and for claims to actually be optimized entirely. And one of these optimization comes through fraud detection. There are a lot of fraudulent transactions that can happen in healthcare claims, and machine learning can help identify those. The other area that we very commonly see in healthcare and life sciences where machine learning is applied is in the space of anomaly detection. Now, this is a large term that encompasses very different types of data sets and types of use cases. But largely in the space of claims, it's basically identifying anomalous, claim records or claim transactions. In the space of clinical diagnostics, it can be, identifying anomalous patient records, be it, images or text or, even structured patient records. So there's a lot of things that machine learning can help with in the space of anomaly detection when it comes to healthcare. The next area that we've seen a lot of traction on is the space of drug discovery and just clinical research that actually involve genomics and a lot of pathology type of images and slides. The major challenge that actually customers face in the space of drug discovery and specifically research is that they're dealing with a lot of unknowns. And the way they solve these unknowns is by a lot of trial and error type of processes. And these processes have a lot of room for optimization. Um, a good example of this, a current example of this is the COVID-19 pandemic. We saw how organizations were able to go and release a vaccine to the market in record time. And all of this was possible by optimizing the different processes of drug discovery, finding the candidate target, and then taking it into a clinical development process in an optimized manner. Machine learning can help with kind of identifying patterns in different transactions. It can help with identifying the target that can then be taken into clinical development process. So it saves a lot of time for customers to actually not follow all those steps sequentially, but parallelize some of them and then introduce pattern recognition and different machine learning techniques that allow for that target identification and then taking that drug into the market in the clinical trial process. And then finally, clinical trial optimization. So this is a large area that actually involves a lot of protocol development type of use cases where you're trying to identify the right set of steps for your clinical trial. It also involves recruitment of the population that will go through the trial by defining the inclusion exclusion criteria for your trial population. It involves detecting adverse events and then sending those adverse events out to the FDA for reporting and regulatory purposes. So a lot of these areas are actually where areas where machine learning immensely helps. The reason is that these are largely done in a very unstructured manner, in the sense that it creates a lot of documentation for the end users. And with natural language processing, you're able to kind of take all of these unstructured data, process it through pipelines where you can build classification algorithms for adverse event detections, for example, or you could use these protocol document as inputs for future protocol design that can be then optimized with machine learning. So a lot can be done in that space, and our customers are actually looking into it quite seriously for becoming more efficient through the clinical trial process. So now let's switch gears a little bit and come to Amazon SageMaker and what it contains. So SageMaker brings together a broad set of capabilities and purpose-built tools for ML, as you can see on the screen. It's quite robust, and it provides you an end-to-end mechanism to prepare, build, train, and tune, and finally deploy and manage your machine learning models. SageMaker is a service with a lot of different features and capabilities in it, and we typically talk about these features sort of falling in 4 different categories. And these categories include data preparation, the model and build phase, essentially, training and tuning, and then finally deploying and managing your models. So I won't go and cover each of these different features that these areas or these categories contain, but I will touch upon a few that we have launched recently. So a very recent feature that we launched within SageMaker is the SageMaker Data Wrangler. This is a tool that allows you to prepare your data for machine learning, like extract the right features, do different transformations on that data before it can be applied into a machine learning algorithm. So it's a great tool for you, for data scientists to actually try out different data processing and feature engineering techniques. We also have our own SageMaker feature store now. And as the name suggests, it basically allows you to store, update, and retrieve different machine learning features for your downstream algorithms. And then we have SageMaker Clarify that detects bias and understands model preparation. Explainability, for example, is a big topic when it comes to healthcare and life sciences, because we cannot treat healthcare and life sciences models as a black box. And by using SageMaker and specifically Clarify, you are able to prepare the right data sets, explain your results, and are able to kind of like get more transparency in your machine learning pipelines. Then on the build side, we have a lot of components and features, but with SageMaker Jumpstart, which is a new feature, we have pre-built solutions for very common use cases. And these are like solutions that you can directly deploy into your environments, into your AWS accounts, and it'll give you everything set up, for a variety of use cases. So it's a great thing to get started with when you're looking into your SageMaker journey. Then on the train and tune side, we have a different set of tools that allow you to train at scale for different types of data sets. And specifically at scale is a very important area for drug discovery. And with the new distributed training libraries, you will be able to kind of experience that scale by training on large data sets. SageMaker Debugger is a technique that allows you to debug and profile your training runs and collect stats about it and identify if there are issues with your training code. And then finally, in your deploy and manage step, we have a series of features that allow you to kind of deploy a model either as an endpoint or inside like a batch construct. But we also have the SageMaker Edge Manager now that allows you to extend these models into edge devices. And then SageMaker Pipelines that allows you to orchestrate your machine learning, steps using different ML ops techniques. All of these features that you see here on the screen are part of SageMaker Studio, which is an IDE specifically for machine learning. So all of these features are available to you through the studio environment, making it really convenient for you to kind of, go through the entire process of creating a project, managing your projects, building training models, designing pipelines, and all of the typical things that data scientists do in their machine learning workflows. So if I have to kind of summarize the key advantages that SageMaker brings, it basically comes into these three categories. The first one is agility. With SageMaker, you're able to accelerate ML development with 20 plus purpose-built tools, ranging from SageMaker Data Wrangler for data preparation to SageMaker Pipelines for workflows, and then SageMaker Clarify for bias detection. It also increases productivity, and that allows you to boost your productivity overall by using Amazon SageMaker Studio, the first IDE, which is designed specifically for ML, that brings everything you need for ML under one unified visual interface. And then the third category would be cost effectiveness. It allows you to eliminate costs of writing custom integration code by leveraging tightly integrated Amazon SageMaker capabilities for data preparation, debugging, bias analysis, training, deployment, and model monitoring. So now let's look at some of the patterns that I highlighted earlier in a little more detail and see how SageMaker features that I showed you before would kind of map into some of these capabilities. So the first thing that I want to sort of bring up is the digital transformation that we've seen in health. With organizations capturing huge volumes of patient information every day, this data is often unstructured and with information trapped in clinical notes, in x-rays, insurance claims, recorded conversations, and much more. This information then needs to be extracted to deliver better health outcomes. But because it's unstructured, it's really difficult to extract. The process to extract this information is very labor intensive and error prone, and the cost and operational complexity is a challenge for most healthcare organizations. So Machine learning can then help HCLS organization or healthcare organizations extract relevant medical information from unstructured text for more accurate investigation and faster decision making. This is a very common pattern that we've seen customers use SageMaker for, because they have specific algorithms for natural language processing that can extend really well to document processing. The next area is around fraud, which I touched upon earlier. So healthcare organizations are very easy targets for health insurance fraud and malicious cyber attacks. This information leaks often includes personally identifiable information, and that could potentially identify specific patients. And health organization needs to protect personal health information at all costs. We have are ready to use solutions around fraud detections. And you can deploy these solutions with just a few clicks. And that allows you to bring machine learning into these types of use cases. And you're able to kind of optimize and look through these transactions in much more detail and get standards and insights that allow you to like become better at preventing fraud and hacks. The next area is around anomaly detection. So we have purpose-built algorithms that actually allow you to create workflows and models that involve machine learning for anomaly detection. These algorithms like k-means and XGBoost, random forest are very common ones that are used for anomaly detection type of use cases. And then we also have a lot of like pre-trained models that are available through the marketplace. So hundreds of them that you can then borrow from the marketplace, deploy it into your pipeline, and then these are available through third parties that have massive quantities of data and access to that data, kind of train these specialized models, which you may or may not have. So this kind of bridges the gap for organizations who do not have access to high quality data sets and be able to realize the value of machine learning in a quick and easy to use manner. And then in the space of clinical trials, I already touched upon the need for NLP and how the availability of a lot of unstructured data poses a challenge for parsing and extracting insights in the clinical trial process. So with SageMaker, you can build, machine learning models that are able to detect and classify different transactions or different records as having or not having adverse events. And this is a good area to sort of optimize, because, tracking of adverse event is a very vital step in the clinical trial process, and it has regulatory implications. So it's really important to kind of remove the manual steps around adverse event detection and allow machine learning to sort of automate and optimize some of these steps. One of the common use cases is also around patient cohort recruitment for the right population for a trial, and also around text classification for searching through corpus of literature for a variety of clinical trial protocol development use cases. And then for the area of drug discovery genomics, as I said before, this area involves a lot of trial and error. And usually customers rely on just brute forcing through a variety of compute clusters. With SageMaker, you are able to sort of like reduce the steps that are taken sequentially for identifying the candidate drug. For example, a very common step is to actually identify the target through the mechanism of latching. So, compounds latch to proteins, and that creates targets that can then be looked into further for clinical development. These actually involve searching through billions of compounds, maybe, and with using machine learning and with SageMaker specifically, you're able to scale that process out and optimize it to focus on the right candidates quicker, so that you can get to that clinical trial stage faster. The other area is in the space of pathology and imaging. So when you're looking for different visual indicators or biomarkers in tissue samples, for example. You're going through the microscope and looking at different slides, and these slides can then be inferred upon through a machine learning model endpoint that's hosted on SageMaker, and it can tell you automatically about certain cells you might be interested in. Again, the space of genomics, there's a lot of precision medicine type use cases that machine learning enables that allows you to correlate clinical conditions with genetic mutations, for example. And that is, an area of research, an active research that allows you to identify different mutations and create a library of these mutations so that other organizations can benefit from it. So all of these are, areas that SageMaker can actively help with. And it also works with healthcare standards around PHI, protection. It's a HIPAA eligible service that allows our customers to actually, process PHI information through the service. And it also has flexibility to extend itself into different healthcare standards. For example, you can train on DICOM images that are stored in your PACS or VNA systems, or you can leverage SageMaker with Fire or HL7 based messages. And these are all specific healthcare data formats that as data scientists you might be familiar with if you're working in the healthcare and life sciences space. So I will now switch gears a little bit and show you a quick demonstration. The interface of SageMaker Studio. And this is the launcher and the screen that you get greeted with when you launch it the first time. You can see that this interface is quite intuitive. It allows you to look at different options for you to get started. Like, for example, using SageMaker Autopilot, you can start building models automatically without the need for writing code. There are different jumpstart options that allow you to basically create solutions for detecting malicious users and transactions, or doing solutions for demand forecasting. And then, of course, with Jumpstart, you can go into more complicated, techniques of modeling as well. Like for this particular one, we are using a popular image classification algorithm, ResNet, that's directly built into Jumpstart for you to explore. So this is a good way to kind of also bring open source models into solutions for different data sets and benchmarking them using the SageMaker Studio interface. You also have the option of doing different ML tasks. This is very correlated to the slide I showed you earlier, where different categories of features within SageMaker map to different tasks that data scientists typically do. And you have a way to kind of launch all of those tasks directly from this interface. And then, of course, there's access to terminal, there is console, notebooks that data scientists typically use for, creating machine learning models. All of this are neatly organized for you in the SageMaker Studio interface. So let me actually run through like a use case on machine learning applied to healthcare and life sciences. So just to introduce you to the use case and the data set. The use case is for a multi-class classification model. And in this particular case, we are building an multi-class image classification model for detecting different lesions in the skin. The data set is coming from the HAM 10,000 data set. It is a large collection of a variety of skin lesions, images of skin lesions. And it's a great data set to experiment with computer vision on. And that's precisely what we are going to do today. So the first step in this process is downloading the data. This data set is downloaded locally in your studio environment, and you can see which environment I'm using. So right now I'm using a 4 vCPU with 16 gigs and a single GPU, 16 gigs of RAM. You can change, to a lower powered instance, very easily. So that allows you to kind of let's say if your data set doesn't involve this kind of volume or does not require image processing. Image processing typically is suited for GPU or accelerated computing, but you can even go to compute optimized instances or general purpose instances for other types of use cases. You also have to have the option of choosing your kernel. So right now I'm using a TensorFlow 2.1 Python kernel. I can choose from a variety of different kernels that are available right inside the Studio interface. So just for an introduction purposes, these are like quick tools for our tips for data scientists who are like beginning to use the SageMaker Studio environment. So the first thing I'm going to do is download the dataset. This dataset is being downloaded from an internal bucket that we have in our accounts. Typically, large volumes of training sets are stored in S3, which is a great platform or object store for SageMaker or storing SageMaker training data sets, which is what we are actually storing it here. We are going to download that and then store it in our local environment, just to do some exploratory analysis. So here you can see that the dataset total size is about 2.5, 2.6 gigabytes, and we have downloaded that entire dataset locally in the Studio environment. The next thing I'm going to do is load this data set up and do some like visualization or exploratory analysis with this data set. So you can see that there are different classes. So in this case, there are different lesion types that we are trying to, or skin conditions that we are trying to predict. So I load all of that up, and then I randomly take, one of these images. Fair warning that these images are not pleasant to look at, but in this case, we'll just go ahead and show you some examples. So there's this 10,000th image in my data set looks like this, and here's the condition that is represented in that image. I can like maybe try a few more just to see. Let's see, look at the 500th image, how it looks. In this case, it looks like this. And if I run through the condition, this is exactly the condition that this image denotes. So as you can see, like this data set comprises of the labels as well as the image that correspond to those labels. Now, I'm going to do some processing on this data set. And right now, I'm doing all of this locally on this notebook because I have a high-powered notebook, but I'm also going to show you how you can offload this entire processing task to a SageMaker processing job and the training task to a SageMaker training job. But right now, this looks must look very familiar to you if you're used to working with Python and is are working on the data science side of things. In this case, we typically create like X and Y for training and for testing. So we basically create the train X, the train Y. The train X consists of all the features, and the train Y consists of all the labels. The features are actually NumPy arrays. So we load up the image and we basically convert it into an array, and then we store it as train X, and the labels are coming from a CSV file, and those images are stored as an array as well. Sorry, those labels are stored as an array as well. So all these NumPy arrays are then stored locally, and there's the folder called process data, which you can see here. And then we go into our training scripts. So in this case, we are writing the training script using Python, and we are using the TensorFlow framework. So in this case, yeah, as you can see, this is a very typical TensorFlow code. It basically instantiates an image classification model. It has a convolutional neural network, and you can see all the different layers that we have added to the neural network, and then some metrics that we are going to track through the creation of this neural network and through its runs. We parse out a few, environment parameters or variables. Like in this case, we want to know where the model directory is, the number of epochs it should run for, the batch size, and different hyperparameters. And then we, just instantiate the models, pass those parameters, and run it. So this is what the script is doing. It's pretty straightforward, TensorFlow script. But we are going to now sort of show you how you can kind of run this locally, the script, as well as when you're running a SageMaker training job. So now, for the purposes of demonstration, we basically go ahead and train locally first. This is a great idea when you're trying to prove things out. So let's say, you want to know whether my code is correct, or, the script is actually, working the way it should. In this case, I'm just running it for 3 epochs, and you can see, the script is working fine. It's publishing some of my metrics that I want to track and optimize. So when I have confirmed that, the next thing I'm going to do is switch to SageMaker. So all of this thing that you're doing before, so far, are things that you can do locally or on SageMaker. But for the purposes of scaling your training out, or going really um, for the full size data set, it's a great idea to kind of use a low powered, maybe notebook instance, just to write your code, and then create a SageMaker processing training and training job to take scale your training job out into a variety of clusters or GPUs, and just utilize the feature for large scale training jobs. So in this case, you can see how SageMaker has APIs to allow you to create like these training jobs and monitor them. So the first thing I'm going to import is SageMaker, and within SageMaker, there are a lot of things that comes with as part of the SageMaker Python SDK that you will be using throughout the process. Um, so let's look at a visual that explains how the SageMaker processing job runs. The processing job itself runs from the confines of a container, right? That container is running on an instance that's fully managed, and it has an interface to read and write data from S3. So this is just like something that allows you to sort of visualize how, when you call the training job, what is actually happening behind the scenes. Sorry, the processing job, what is happening behind the scenes. So in this case, we write a script for processing. We call it processing.py. And what we are essentially using are certain set of libraries to load the data set, to convert it into train and test, divide into train and test, and then save them as NumPy arrays. So this entire script is sort of written and packaged up like we were doing this in the local notebook instance, but now we have a separate script called processing.py, which we are then going to pass in the SageMaker processing job. So here's how the processing job actually works. So you basically call the SageMaker scikit-learn processing. We are using the built-in scikit-learn container for this, but we are also going to show you how you can build your own container to actually run this processing job as well. You define some input and output parameters, and you can run this using the code here, which I've commented out. But for this particular demonstration, we are going to use a building your own container model. This is great when you have some custom libraries that you want to just run your training job with, especially in healthcare. Like for example, PyDicom could be one of the libraries that you package inside your container, and that allows you to run machine learning directly on DICOM images. So this is a great way for you to kind of introduce any dependency in your processing or training job, and then have it run in a managed way. This code basically, just takes different libraries, right? It's a Docker file that takes different libraries. And then I'm basically using Amazon ECR, or Elastic Container Registry, to build the container, and then just push it inside the container registry. So this code over here basically takes the Docker file, builds the container out, and then gives you a Docker URI that we will then use in our processing job. So once the script runs, you are able to then create a processing job with this container. It's called the script processor, and with script processor, you can pass code, like your processing code using the API, and then you just run that code like you would in a built-in container, and this allows you to basically um, take your processing job and scale those out. You're also able to define like the instance on which this will run and the count of instances. So in this case, we are running it on an M5 extra large, but you can run it on a GPU. You can run it on a single instance or multiple instances. So you can run it in a distributed manner if you wanted to. So these are great like tools for scaling out your machine learning models. Now, in terms of SageMaker training, there are a variety of ways you can run training. You can use the built-in algorithms. You can use the script mode, or you can bring your own container. In this case, we're going to use the script mode. This allows it's very flexible because you're using a framework like TensorFlow, which is fully supported on SageMaker, and it allows you to like retain your training script the way you would even outside of SageMaker. As you can see over here, there are some specific changes that you typically do to your training scripts just to kind of like take advantage of the SageMaker environment. But other than that, most of the training script is exactly the way that you saw above, which is a great portability mechanism. So you can like bring models or scripts that are written outside of SageMaker and still run them on SageMaker with very minimal effort. So once I write my training script up, I have a very similar construct. We basically identify the train and test data set and then create an estimator. And in that estimator, we basically pass the training script as an entry point. Behind the scene, again, this is basically taking this training script and running it inside a container. Um, I can also define the training instance type and the number of instances on which this training should run. And then once it's completed, you'll see logs and are able to sort of like use the model that is trained for inference. There's also a feature within SageMaker that allows you to do automatic model tuning, and this is basically a hyperparameter optimizer. Within SageMaker Tuner, you can define different hyperparameters that you want to optimize. Like in this case, I want to pick the right learning rate, number of epochs, and batch size. And you can then define the type of parameter. So in this case, the learning rate is a continuous parameter, and I want to test in the space of 0.001 to zero point 0.2. And then I can define some scaling types for this particular continuous parameter. I also have the option to choose different epochs, which is an integer parameter, and then the batch size, which is also integer. So these are the ranges I want to search in. And then you're allowed to define what kind of metric that you want to optimize. So in this case, I want to optimize AUC and I want to optimize it for maximization. So with that, you are able to sort of like run this tuning job that gives you the results of the maximum AUC. You can also do the minimum and maybe change the metric to loss, in which case you'll be able to find the run the hyperparameter the minimal loss. So there are different techniques that you can experiment with here. But when the tuner runs, just like you would a training job, as you saw before, you call tuner.fit and you wait. So once the tuner runs, you are able to kind of like look through the different runs. In this case, as you can see, it ran 3 times and I got different hyperparameters here that were run. And then it also tells me the objective metric that I was tracking and optimizing. So in this case, the best run was this one where I had the maximum AUC. Now, once I have optimized my model, the next thing I want to do is deploy the best version of the model. And that is actually automatically done by using tuner.deploy. So tuner.deploy automatically selects the best run from different runs of your hyperparameter tuning job, and then deploys it on an endpoint for you to do predictions on. Once the model is deployed, you can invoke the endpoints. So in this case, I'm going to pick a few images from the test set, and then I'm going to sort of run a predict method on top of these images. And you can see I get the probability of different classes. And I can take the class with the maximum value, and that gives me the prediction for that particular image. So this is like an end-to-end process of how you would create like an image classification model on SageMaker. You can replicate this for very different type of use cases, different types of use cases, like text classification, or even go away from classification into like maybe a regression task, or even unsupervised techniques that you can write this up in. One cool way to actually use the SageMaker endpoints is to create like a front end application that can invoke. All of these endpoints are um, provided with methods that you can write in your front end application, and then use that application as a visualization mechanism for the model. So here's a very simple application we built. This is, consider a healthcare provider that might have an application in their own systems that allow you to sort of look at different images and get a result. I'm going to like try this out right now. So let's look through some of the files I have. Let's look at the demo data folder, and you can see different, skin conditions for which I have images for. I'll put maybe one or two conditions. So this first one is the image looks like this, and then the model is identifying the right condition. So this is a great way to kind of like look at some examples. Let's try a few more, maybe for a different condition. So I'll go to, let's say, this one. It uploads, and then it tries to basically predict the condition. In this case, it's saying benign keratosis, which is the right condition. So this is just an example workflow of taking that machine learning model that you have actually built in a Jupyter notebook, and then putting it behind an endpoint and invoking it through an application. So let me go back to the slide deck to take you through the end of the presentation. Now, here are some great resources for you to get started with SageMaker. These are links that take you through different, examples, use cases, and then you also have console access. So you just have to sign up for an AWS account, and then go to the console, click on SageMaker, and that will give you access to all the features that I showed you and even more. With that, I'd like to thank you for your time, for listening in, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation. Looking forward for you to try out SageMaker and tell us and give us your feedback. Thank you.